doing a little Q&A today. Thought I'd get on here, maybe answer some questions that people sent to me, whether email, Twitter. I just thought I would, you know, maybe talk about the draft, just a little bit of what's going on in NCAA, what's going on in my life, maybe MFN as a whole. Um, yeah, haven't been on here in a bit, so I thought it'd be cool to talk to you guys. So we'll start off with our first question. At JohnnyFootball11213 asked me, why are you leaving MFN, and does it have to do with the new codes? Interesting. If many of you know, I've already left many of my teams. I think I have two left, so I'll be leaving those after the season. Not really to do with the codes per se. I don't really enjoy the new codes, to be honest. So I wouldn't say that helped. But for me, I've kind of adapted to all the code changes over the years. They have gotten really frequent in the last, from 4.3 to 4.5, but it's more to do with other stuff in life. I want to go to the lake this summer a lot, and we don't have internet service up at my cabin, so there's a lot of different things that added to it. I kind of want to concentrate on being the commissioner and of NCAA and really digging in to that end. But I don't think it has to do with any one thing, especially with the codes. Okay, another question. At Twin Shooter 459, what do you think the biggest difference is in 4.4 and 4.5, and is the long pass back in 4.5? I would say the codes are actually pretty similar in a lot of aspects, but the one thing I've noticed that's completely different is the interceptions, the turnover rate. On 4.4, you saw a lot of low interceptions from the quarterbacks. I saw a lot of single-digit actual interceptions. With this new code, you're seeing, guys throwing 7 interceptions. I think I had a game where the opposition threw 10 interceptions in one game. My quarterback in League 75 has the most interceptions I think I've ever thrown in a season, like 20, over 20. So you're seeing a lot more interceptions. As far as the gameplay, it's pretty similar. Still the same type of short passing game. You can throw medium and long passes, but I find that that's where you're tending to see a lot more of the interceptions because the DBs react a lot quicker. And then another aspect that I saw is different is the curls that were working so good in 4.4. They don't work as well in 4.5. You're seeing the slants work a little bit better, and the curls seem to not do as well. But that could just be me. I only have 2 teams, so I don't have a huge sample size. But defensively, I find pretty similar. I'm running similar style that I did to 4.4. Yeah, but I don't think it's that dramatic as a lot of people are saying. I think we're still getting over the fact that 4.4 was so dramatically different than 4.3 that it's still kind of in the same mode where it's low scoring defensive battles, but you're seeing a lot of turnovers, a lot of penalties, a lot of pretty much ugly games. 4.5 has a lot of those ugly games where it's really hard to watch. All right, next up, at 3and out 11, what direction is MFN headed, and what do you think would help the game or hurt the game in the future? I think MFN's headed in a good direction. A lot of good veteran owners. There seems to be a lot of new people, filtering in. We are losing people here and there, but I think it kind of makes up for it with new people coming in, so it stays about the same. What you're finding is a lot of frustration, though, especially with the veterans that are used to, having, all the work they've done over the years. They're used to their game plans and what they've built. It's kind of tough for them because they're having to start from scratch each time we get a new code. And so for me, I think one of the big things that JDB will have to figure out is what's more important to please like the veteran owners that have been around a long time that are trying to get the game headed more towards realism, or are they trying to appease, maybe the newer owner that likes exciting games where they're scoring and it's more fun? And until he decides which route he wants to take, you're going to kind of be in this mode where we kind of are in limbo. And I think that when he kind of melds the two modes together and you have a fun game that you're able to have high scoring, but also a game that it looks real and feels real, then I think that's when you'll start to see the game go to another level. But right now, it's so far away from that you kind of just have to accept it for what it is. And if you enjoy it, then you keep playing, and if you don't, then maybe you move on and come back later. I don't really see a big need for people to criticize or to complain about it, because that doesn't really do much. If you really want to help the game, go be in the beta league and actually put in work and try to see the game improve that way. But I don't think posting my quarterback threw 15 interceptions in one game is going to really do anything for JDB, because I don't know if there's one aspect that he could go just fix that would change the game and make it better without messing up other parts of the game. And that's kind of where we're at, with the pendulum swinging back and forth, with little minute changes that he does on each code. But we'll go up to the next question, and this is at Brino Nuggets 420. Any intel on when the next code will be released? And interesting that we were just talking about JDB, because I just talked to him. Let's see if I can go get the message he sent me. I asked him about about the code changes and if there's any timetable and all that. And basically he says, no, I can't make any promises on a timeline for either at this point, only that I'm spending time on the site overhaul right now rather than the next version, especially given the feedback that the code updates are too frequent. So basically people are complaining a lot about how the codes are coming out so frequently, that he's decided to take a step back from the code and concentrate on the site overhaul. He doesn't know when it'll be complete on the site overhaul, but before I feel like I need to get back into the engine code or not. So basically he's saying he doesn't know if he'll be able to finish the site overhaul fast enough before he has to jump back over to the code side. So he's kind of bouncing back and forth. And what you're going to see is we might not have any changes really to the game for a bit. That was kind of the norm in the past, where we didn't get code changes, for big lengths of time. And lately we've kind of gotten used to this quick code changes and hot fixes. And so maybe it'll go back to where people can get used to this 4.5 for a while and dial it in and maybe actually enjoy it after you get to know it a little bit more. But I'm more excited about the site overhaul. I think that's going to add a lot. There's going to be a lot of things that the site overhaul is going to allow us to do, as far as the fun factor, with editing and like coaches and there's a bunch of different things. The look, logos. There's going to be a lot of different things with the site overhaul that I think is going to be beneficial. That it's going to get a lot of people that are kind of seeing the game a little bit stale, like. They're going to look at it and go, man, this is a cool update and I'm excited about this. Kind of like when the private leagues came into the fold. Alright, next up, at GatorBait666. What do you think about Florida's recruiting class, and does Tyree Jackson have the skills to supplant the veteran transfer Neil O'Brien? Okay, this is a good one. I'm talking about draft. I love the draft. This was one of the first years where I felt, after the draft, I was really high on Florida. I thought Florida did a really awesome job. They were one of my top 3 teams, I thought, after the draft. And then when you go to training camp, that always seems to change, and you see team guys bust, and you're like, okay, well, that team didn't do as well as I had initially thought, just based on training camp. Well, Florida actually did as good as I was thinking they might do after the draft. Their first 3 rounds all did really well. Josh Allen, I thought, was a steal at their pick at number 5. He's an all-around stud. He's going to start out at linebacker for him, and I think he's going to start from day one. So he'll immediately add to that group on defense. Second round, I thought they got a first-round talent in quarterback Tyree Jackson. His vol was a little bit higher than you'd like. Maybe that's what made him fall out of the first round. But then he boomed, so they got a starting quarterback, and my second-ranked quarterback in the draft. They got him in the second round, and so I think that's a future franchise type quarterback that they were able to get. And then in the third round they got another guy that I was really high on, and that was Rock Ya-Sin, another really high vol guy. He was a DB with all the skills you look for, just not as fast as maybe some of the top end guys like a DeAndre Baker. But I think Rock Ya-Sin immediately adds to that defensive backfield, especially with some of the guys that are getting older, with Rhodes and Bowman, some of those guys getting older in the Florida backfield. So I think Rock Ya-Sin will slide into the nickel spot from in year one, and then he has the potential to start going forward. And I don't really think on these codes that the pure speed is going to hurt him in this instance. Unfortunately for Florida, I wasn't that as impressed with the rest of their draft. I thought the first 3 rounds they hit it out of the park. They got 3 4-star players, but I don't think they added a whole lot after that. So I still give them a really high grade on that draft, just because whenever you can pull 3 guys of that caliber out of any draft, you're going to be happy. But I don't think they got great value in the later rounds, especially in a draft that was so deep. I don't think they did as well down the stretch as some of the other teams. And as far as Jackson, on these codes you'll find that if your young quarterbacks don't have their accuracy up to par, then they will struggle mightily. You saw in the week 1 of the scrimmages, you saw Jackson go 0 for 33, which is ridiculous. I think Kyler Murray had an awful game. Michigan's quarterback Ryan Finley had an awful game. All these quarterbacks that are young that have really high future accuracy, but their current accuracy is really low. They are actually probably, I would say, unplayable. Because when a guy goes 0 for 33, basically that you have no chance to win a game. So I don't think he's going to supplant Neil O'Brien in year 1. It might take a couple years. It depends on how fast his accuracy grows from year to year. But I definitely think Jackson's the future in Florida. That thing I know. That's one thing I know for sure. All right, next up, at Mike and Ike 33. What were some of the best picks in the draft and some that you didn't like? All right, this is something that this is a cool question, because we did the draft show and there was a lot of players I liked, and some boom, some don't. I think I posted the first my top 50 board and all the busts and booms, and there's actually more booms this year than busts, so that was good. Some of the picks that I really liked, we'll kind of go down a list. I really liked the Haskins pick. He was my top quarterback. Arizona was able to get him. He had the high vol, but he boomed. And he's a little bit different than some of the other young quarterbacks that have been coming out. I think that he actually has more skills than a lot of the guys that have been coming out over the years. Haskins is going to be an absolute stud. It's just going to come down to if Arizona can use him in the right way and get that offense built around him. But I think that that's a great pick. Some other guys I liked, A.J. Brown and DeAndre Baker. I've said this on the board before. I thought, after the draft, after training camp, Baker is probably your best player in the draft. Right now, Kansas has him as a free safety, but he's been a max out, really high vol guy, absolute stud. Reminds me of David Orange when he came out. So I think Baker could play corner or safety. And then another one is A.J. Brown, the wide receiver who went to Auburn. This is a player that was really high vol in the draft, so he kind of fell a little bit. Auburn nabbed him and got the luck of the camp. He comes out as probably my second best player in the draft if you could just go by pure talent. To be able to land him, Auburn, I thought that was a great pick. And then some other guys I liked. I really liked the Christian Wilkins pick after the fact for Florida State. I thought during the draft it was a reach because he was a high vol guy, and it was like if he didn't hit, he wasn't going to be that great of a player. But he hit, and so Florida State got a really good interior lineman. He could probably slide out and play defensive end if he wanted. So I like that pick. And then another player that was similar was Dexter Lawrence in the second round. I thought Dexter Lawrence to Washington, I thought that was a really good pick. Another high vol guy that boomed, and you're going to get a lot of value out of those type of guys. We'll go down some other guys. Greedy Williams, great pickup for Oklahoma State. They're looking to fill, the Hall of Famer Marcelino Rausch. He retired 2 years ago, and Hoke is starting to get older, Juan Hoke, and so they really needed some upgrades in the defensive backfield. And fortunately for them, Greedy Williams hit for them, and he's going to be one of the better guys. And just knowing how good Oklahoma State is at using defensive backs, I think that he's going to end up being one of the better players. Ryan Finley, the quarterback from it. There's a lot of good later round quarterbacks. Ryan Finley is Michigan's new franchise quarterback for the future. I thought that was great value. And then Kansas drafted Gardner Minshaw, and they ended up cutting him before the training camp, which was one of the biggest uh, blunders in my opinion in the draft because this is a really high vol later round quarterback and he had a lot of potential and he ended up booming. Syracuse gave him one of the biggest freshman quarter contracts we've seen once he came on the market, and he's going to be a future guy. I think Syracuse has picked up a future starter, and the fact that Kansas cut him before even seeing what he did in camp, I think was a huge blunder. But you saw guys like Finley, Minishaw, Nick Fitzgerald, probably one of the best values in this draft. He got him in this. Bama got him in the 6th round. He's a booming quarterback that has the potential to be a starting quarterback in the future. I thought that was great value. Other guys that I liked the Spencer Rattler pick from Oklahoma. Not that they needed a quarterback with Mordecai, but they were able to nab him. Great value there. And then I like the Paris Campbell pick in the 2nd round for Notre Dame. He's going to be a really good wide receiver for them. I thought that was a great pick. Montez Sweat for BYU in the late 2nd. They move him from defensive end to linebacker. I think he's going to end up being a real good player. And I liked Lindstrom for Iowa, the guard. I think he's one of the better linemen in the draft. They were able to get him at the top of the 2nd round. And BYU got another guy I really liked, and that's Bo Benchwall. Really strong offensive guard. I think he's going to be a stud for him. He was one of the guys I really liked, and I had him on my big board a little bit higher than maybe other people. And then, everybody knew I liked Jake Sternberger. He went to Oklahoma State. I think he's going to be a really good wide receiver. Sam Mustipher, the guard for Washington State, really good value, where they got him in the 5th. Vashawn Joseph from A&M, I think he's a great pick, and Emmanuel Hall from Wazoo as well. Those are some of the guys I really pinpointed that I liked in this draft. There's a ton more that were good, but those are just some of them that stood out to me. And we'll move on to the next question. At MFN God 1, how many championships have you won and on MFN, and what is the secret to your title success? This is interesting because I used to actually keep track when maybe in my first year or two. I used to keep track of my championships, and then I kind of lost track. If I had to guess how many championships I've won, I'd probably say maybe 60. If I had to ballpark it, maybe somewhere right in there. A lot of the leagues that I was in that I won a lot of championships are no longer around just because, once people start getting out of leagues and they don't fill up to 16, they kind of disappear, and so you kind of lose track. But yeah, after there's certain leagues that I cared about winning championships. Like NCAA was one of the ones that I really liked. 75 was one that when I got my first championship, it was like a weight off my shoulders. And there's certain ones that you care about more than others. But overall, I don't think it's all about who has the most championships. I think it's when you're in a league with a lot of talent, especially at the owners, it's always fun to win a championship. But I think there's more to it than that. Just building a roster, from the bottom and figuring out how to get that team to a certain level. That's something I always think about. Oh, sorry. All right. So next up, let's see. At David's Goliath. What did you think about Alabama's draft class and who will win the SEC West this season? Alabama's draft class was an interesting one. I think Lamar in the 1st round, he's a low vol guy that they moved from linebacker to defensive end. I think he's going to be a good player even though he went down a couple points. I think he's still a really solid pick. I didn't like their 2nd round pick, Jonah Williams. I wasn't a fan of him in the draft, and so when they picked him, I didn't think that was a great pick at the time, and then he busted, so he ended up really not being a good pick. In the 3rd round, they got a quarterback in Shermer. I wasn't a fan of Shermer just because of his low accuracy. He actually went up a point, and so I think he'll be a solid, maybe backup for the future. But now that they have a plethora of quarterbacks at Bama, I don't know if there's really a place for Shermer going forward. So I'm not a big fan of that pick. The 4th round, they got Dax Raymond, the tight end. They moved him to tackle. He didn't hit, so he's kind of a bust. And then you start getting some guys I like. Justice Hill in the fifth. I thought that was great value. He's one of my better running backs. I think he went down a little, but I think he's still going to add a lot to the depth, especially behind the star running back Najee Harris. In the sixth round was probably one of my favorite picks of the draft, and that was Fitzgerald. And the quarterback, here's a guy that you get in the sixth round, and he was definitely a better player than sixth round. I'd say he's about fourth round grade on him. Despite his high vol, I think it was crazy that I think it was just because there were so many good quarterbacks in this draft that he fell. He was able to nab him in the sixth round, so he kind of doubled up on the quarterback position, and he's going to be a much better player than Shermer just with that potential. So I thought that was a really good pick. And then in the seventh round, they got Lil Jordan Humphrey, the wide receiver. I thought this was a good pick. He actually has some speed and he booms, so he actually will add some talent to that wide receiver core. So I think that was a good pick. I thought the sixth and seventh round picks were two of the better picks for them. So it was an overall good draft. I wouldn't say great, but definitely that quarterback is going to be the highlight of this draft. And as far as the SEC West, I think it's going to be a similar conference to how it finished last year. I think A&M's definitely going in the favorite. They got really hot second half of the season, especially in the playoffs. Bama and Auburn were right there. Both of those teams could take the next step. Although with Auburn not being able to address the quarterback position, I'm kind of worried about them. And then LSU, I don't know what to think about LSU. I really haven't got a good handle on them. I'm going to have to see them a little bit more before I make judgment. But I haven't made my picks for this next season, so I'm not going to go out and say who I think is going to win the division. But I do think it's going to be a very competitive division. Let's just see if if it changes from last year. All right, next up we got at Rhino Michelle. What is your thoughts on the NFL instituting replay on pass interference? Okay, so this is an NFL question to the real world. Just recently at the owners' meetings, they came out and they voted in a replay of the pass interference on offense and defense. And this is interesting to me because once you start replaying penalties, it gets really tricky because I almost want to think that you can call pass interference on a lot of different plays. There's so many times I watch a play in slow motion that I'm like, man, he totally grabbed his arm or he did this and this. And so while I think it'll save us, some of those games like the NFC Championship game, I think it will in the long run kind of be a pain in the butt with the replays. And I don't know. I think it'll be good and bad. When I'm watching an NFL game, though, I'm already at the point where after every play, I'm looking for the flag. And whenever you're doing that, that takes away the fun factor of the game, especially when a good play happens and I'm like, okay, is there a penalty? Oh, there's a penalty. And so you're starting to get to that point where now you do that, and then they don't call the penalty, and you're like, thank God, and then they replay it, and then they call the penalty, and so it's going to be like, it's gonna really drag down a fan, I think. Just because there's so many penalties in the game as it is. And so I'm going to reserve judgment just because I do think it's always nice to get the plays right and the calls right. But, it might take away a lot of the fun factor of watching a game when every time something happens, you're still second guessing if it's actually going to stay or get overturned. And so I'm going to reserve judgment on that one. But we'll see. This is going to be a test season. We'll see. They might not keep it going after one season. All right, next up, at Draft Guru 100, what did you think about Draftapalooza 2, and how do you keep improving the draft each year? I thought Draftapalooza 2 was awesome. The fact that we had that week in between the season and the draft gave me and Sloth so much more time to really dive in and do extra stuff with the draft. I did a bunch of things with the big board and the mock draft and all that stuff, and I really felt like I had a good handle on the draft. So when Sloth and I and Brino did the show, I felt like I was coming to you guys with a little bit of insight, and I knew more about the players than I have in other drafts. And so that I thought that in that aspect it was really, really fun. It is a grind. We were on there for 5.5 hours, so that's always tough. And so I always worry that we're gonna bore you guys with our stale commentary. But for the most part, I think Sloth and I had a blast. We kept going. Unfortunately for us, it's so much fun that we just keep. We could probably talk forever, and so that aspect, I think it's fulfilling. Everything that I was hoping for. I did like the call-ins from last year a lot, and so the fact that we didn't do the call-ins this year as much kind of was a bummer. But overall, I thought that the whole draft and all the commentary and the content that we were able to provide made this whole draft class super awesome. And the fact that I knew the player names, since I renamed like over 200 guys in this draft, that made it more fun for me. And I doubt I'll ever do that again. But I thought that made this draft a little bit special for me to really know the players. All right, next up, Sooner Pride 1 at Sooner Pride 1. Do you still value speed above all else, or are positional attributes more important on the new codes? This is interesting because everybody knows I'm a speed guy. I've always valued speed, and I think that's one of the biggest things when I started MFN is I came in with that theory about speed. Even before I even knew that it worked on MFN, I came in and I was all about getting fast guys. And then it started catching on that speed was a lot on this game, and everybody wanted speed. And so now I think we've gotten to the point where speed is still the key component for a lot of owners when they look at a player. What I've found on these new codes, especially 4.4 and 4.5, since there's so much short passing, a lot of swing passes, dump offs, a lot of runs, we don't necessarily need speed as crucially as you did in the past, and so you can get away with a linebacker in the high 60s or low 70s as long as they have other skills, especially tackling. I think tackling is huge now, especially with a lot of these swing passes, because you get one guy in open field against that runner, and if he makes the tackle, it's no gain, and if he doesn't, they could bust it for a bigger gain. So I think that speed isn't necessarily as important, but I will say this: if you build your team with a bunch of guys that don't have speed, then you have problems, and I think you'll notice that teams will actually be able to move the ball on you if you have a slow team overall. And so for me, I still value speed, and I get a lot of fast guys, but if you have a lot of fast guys surrounding maybe a couple guys that aren't fast, then you can get away with it, and you can kind of hide that speed. Like my USC team last year, I had pretty good speed at certain positions, but then I started two linebackers that were in the 60s, and they actually performed really well for me. And I think that that's the key: is you have to have speed at other positions to be able to make up for it. If you just go ahead and draft all guys with no speed, then I think you're going to have issues. And so you kind of got to be able to hide that no speed. But overall, I think you can get away with a little bit less speed on the newer versions of MFN than you could in the past. All right, so last question. At Tanker Mom, who is your pick for top freshman players by position? All right, so this is a lot to think about, going through and trying to figure out, some of the freshmen and who they got drafted by, how they're going to use, are they going to start. We'll start at quarterback. I was looking at all the quarterbacks, and the only ones that I could see that have actual starting caliber potential right now are Haskins, Minshew, and Fitzgerald. And so I'm going to go with Haskins. I really think Haskins is going to be the guy day one in Arizona. We'll see how that offense runs, but I think he's got a lot of skills. Minshew, I don't know if he's going to beat Hemphill and start for Syracuse, and that's a lot to ask for a freshman to go into the team that won the Orange Bowl last year and be the starting quarterback. And Fitzgerald, I don't know if Alabama is going to go with the freshman over Willie Beeman, who they picked up on a transfer from Auburn, who's looked pretty good in the spring so far. So I'm going to go with Haskins at the quarterback position. At running back, there was only one player on my list for this one, and that's Josh Jacobs from Clemson. I think he's coming in as an absolute stud. He's going to supplant, former Doak Walker Award winner and Dennis Dunshaw. So I think Josh Jacobs slides in from day one and becomes an absolute star at Clemson. Wide receiver, there's a handful of guys. You got Metcalf, Hollywood, and A.J. Brown, all first rounders, top top caliber players. They're all going to be the number one wide receiver most likely for their team this year, and so you could pick either any of them. I would say dark horse here is Paris Campbell. He's coming in. He has a little bit more weapons around him at Notre Dame, but I think that the way that program likes to pass the ball and put up big numbers, I think that Paris Campbell is a guy to watch. Could put up some good statistics. Tight end, this was down. With Fant moving to running back, it came down for me. Hawkinson going to Washington State. That offense was super poor last year, so it depends on if they get that offense going. But I'm going to go ahead and take Irv Smith here. I think that Army does a really good job of getting the tight end the ball. You saw that when they had Kurz. In past years, they've always involved the tight end. So I think while Irv Smith maybe didn't have the best camp, I think he's still talented enough, and he's going to get the ball thrown his way enough from that young quarterback in Rothrock that I think Irv Smith's going to end up being the best freshman this year. I went ahead and skipped the offensive line because it's kind of hard to evaluate offensive line. So I went with D-line, and there was two guys I really like. Another thing about this new code is I feel like defensive tackles are valued a lot more than they have been, and especially on 4.4. I've gotten a lot of more sacks out of my defensive tackles in this 4.5 code. So I went ahead and took Bosa and Wilkins. Florida State gets a lot of production out of their defensive line. You go back to Landis and guys in the past that they've had. They've always managed to get a high number of sacks from their D-line. So I think Wilkins will translate to his skills and get good stats right off the bat. And Bosa, while he didn't boom in camp, he's still an elite pass rusher. And I think he's going to start, D tackle one right off the bat. So I think those two are the guys to watch for on the defensive line. Linebacker, this is kind of like the receiver position. There's a handful of guys. Josh Allen, Devin Bush at Michigan, Tavon Coney at USC. All these guys are going to get starting roles right off the bat and put up big numbers. And then a dark horse here is Montez Sweat, the former defensive end who moved over to middle linebacker for BYU. I think he has, he's going to a really good team. So just being on, one of the better teams, starting in the heart of the defense, gives him a chance to really put up some numbers. So I like him at that position. And then if you go to cornerback, a lot of good guys. Devin White from Notre Dame is going to have a good year. I think he's going to be, right up there. But I like Greedy Williams. I think, like I said earlier, Oklahoma State does a really good job of getting a lot of production out of DBs, and I think Greedy Williams brings a lot to the table. Dark horse here, I really liked Oklahoma's Tylon Lynch. They got him in the second round, if I remember right. I really think he has a shot at having a good season. He's going to probably slide in, right off the bat, be a top defensive back for a team that's got championship aspirations. So I think Tylon Lynch is a guy to watch. But I'm going to say Greedy Williams right now. Safety, there was a few guys. DeAndre Baker is definitely the best safety out of this group. He plays for Kansas, so I'm not quite sure how that'll translate. But if you've seen a lot of the top safety statistics during the years, they usually are on teams that don't finish as well. So I give DeAndre Baker a big shot at really putting up some big numbers. And then you got Taylor Rapp, Syracuse. Syracuse is always, it's kind of like DBU. They get a lot of production like Oklahoma State out of their DBs. And so I wouldn't be surprised, going in. Kenneth Chu is retired. Taylor Rapp slides in, starts right off the bat. I wouldn't be surprised if Taylor Rapp has a solid season. And then Georgia, they nabbed Jonathan Abrams, the 21st or 22nd pick, somewhere in there. And I really think that he has the potential to make an immediate response. I don't know what I was thinking, but immediate impact. That's what it is. He's going to make an immediate impact with Georgia, and I really like that pick, despite Shooter having reservations about it. And so I think those are my safeties, and that's all for the question and answering. Everybody likes to to ask questions, and so this is kind of a different outlet where I can get in front of you guys and answer some questions. Maybe people, I think a lot of people like to PM me questions just throughout the year, asking me stuff. So maybe I'll do this again if people like it. We'll see. Otherwise, I like to answer on the radio show. We answer a lot of questions if we can, if people call in or whatever. But I thought this was a cool time since we have a little bit of a break before the regular season comes out. Um, but yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later. Peace.